Yeah. All fruits are getting it. Yeah, sure. I'm not joking. I'm serious. Like, whole fruits have it. In our show, people are getting it.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, after Yom Tov, people tested positive. Okay, so we are up to the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph. The Mishnayos are so conveniently placed at the beginning of the Amud in Beitzah. Beitzah is very organized. Okay, Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Meviim eitzim minasada. You're allowed to gather wood from the field. Now, of course, Rashi says hatlushim. You're not allowed to cut wood, but you're allowed to gather wood if there's already cut wood in the field. Minasada, and of course, because there is halacha, although you're allowed to carry on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to go out of the tchum. Mina mechunis. If it's just from the open field, maybe not even your property, hefker, it has to be mechunis. What does mechunis mean? So Rashi here is quite clear. In kinsan me'erev Yom Tov, you had to have gathered them from erev Yom Tov. What does that accomplish? The goli daite dalayu samach. So that's like being masmid them. So it sounds from Rashi like it would be muksa. You can't just pick up a random stone or a random log. But if you specifically designated this pile, you created a pile, and you said this is what I'm going to use from, or to supply myself with fuel over Yom Tov, therefore the einon muksa won't be muksa. Aval hamefuzarin muksa. But any wood that's just scattered throughout a field would be muksa because it's nothing that you designate. This is how Rashi learns the Gemara, and this is how we'll learn the Gemara. And it actually is very shmak to learn that with Rashi, the question is a question of muksa. But there's a lot of there's a lot of diversity, I would say, amongst the Rishonim as to what the problem might be. And I think the Rambam says it's al tatircha. The Ran says it might even be a problem of ma'amer. The halacha of ma'amer is that if you're in a field and you cut down wheat, you're not allowed to gather down the cut wheat in the field and make it into a pile. And therefore, it has to be pre-gathered. Okay. Mina mechunis, if it's in a field, but if it's in a karfef, then afilu mina mefuzar, even if it's scattered around. What is a karfef? Mina karfef is shu mishtamer. That's a protected area. People would have private protected backyards, umuk of savif, and it might even be surrounded with a fence. Then, since that's all your property and you're controlling it, afilu mifuzar and shaboy. If a person has wood in his backyard, automatically a person assumes that any wood in my backyard is something that I could use. It's no different than having food in your cabinet. If you have food in your cabinet, you're allowed to use it on Yom Tov. You don't say, I wasn't thinking to use this food before Yom Tov. Anything that's yours, part of your inventory, so to speak, you're allowed to use. So there's no problem with it. According to the Rishonim, that there's a problem of ma'amer, we're going to have to understand why is ma'amer a problem in the field, yet not a problem in the karfef. Samuch le'ir, that's weiter. Ezel karfef, what is a karfef? Kol shahu samuch le'ir. Anything that's close to a city, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, and samuch le'ir means mamish. It has to be very close, right near the city. Now, Tosfos discusses the problem of ma'amer. It says, mina karfef afilu mina mefuzar. Frek Tosfos tema ha'hava ma'amer hu av malacha. It's also to gather cut pieces of wheat into a pile. That's a deraisa, and whether or not you're allowed to do ma'amer on Yom Tov or Tzorech Nefesh will be problematic because we normally know only from Elisha and on you're allowed to do. You cannot have the malach of ma'amer if you just have scattered things and you gather them. The Isser of ma'amer is only in the place where it grows. So you're in a wheat field. You've just cut down a whole bunch of wheat, and now you want to gather it together. That's the Isser Ma'amer. But if you're in a regular field and there's branches lying around, and you gather them together, that would not be Ma'amer. The Ran clearly cannot learn like that, because then it wouldn't make a difference if this is in a karfef or if it's in a field. As long as it's not produce that is grown that you're gathering, it shouldn't be Ma'amer. The Ran clearly learns Ma'amer would apply even even if it's not in the place that it's grown. And the Ran, I guess, would have to explain why would a karfif be different. Zog to Gemara weiter. And Yosy Omer, Kol shenichnosen loy b'faiseches. Any yard, storage area where you need a key to get into, meaning it's a locked and protected area, you'd be allowed to gather wood from there because it's considered like I'm thinking about all that wood because it's guarded. Obviously, it's in my pantry. Even if it's as far away as the end of the tchum, it's still good. So it doesn't have to be right near your house. It can be far away from your house as long as it's within the tchum Shabbos of your house. Any guarded area that you have, if it's within the tchum Shabbos, you're thinking to use from it if you need anything. For instance, the wood for fuel. If you have properties that are out of your tchum that you can't access on Yom Tov, of course, those, even within the area of tchumen, would not, you'd not be able to take those.
Yosy,
Yes.
are we talking specifically outside of your chutzner or outside of your Rishos Yachid, or not necessarily?
Well, if it's according to Yosy, where it's a filu with tchum Shabbos, it could be quite a distance away,
right?
as long as it's within your range.
But if it is, but according to the
According to Yehuda, it has to be besamuch. Kosher samuch here. Rashi samuch means mamish. So what mamish means, I'm not sure. Does it have to abut your property? Does it have to be very close?
according to
And
Rabbi
they're
Yosy,
going to talk about the shiurim.
according to Rabbi Yosy, if it's something that doesn't have a key, but it's in your,
But it's very close. What would the halacha be?
yeah.
Oh, that's a good. That's what the Gemara is. That's what the whole Gemara is about.
Okay.
Because the Gemara says Rabbi Yosef, you need a key. So Dovi, which is the Gemara is going to ask, what if you're close? Do you also need a key? Or on the flip side, what do the Chachamim hold? If the Chachamim hold, if it's far, would a key work? Right? If Rabbi Yosef holds you need a key in both places, maybe the Chachamim is being makel, maybe Yehuda holds that if you're far, key doesn't work. So the Gemara is going to go through the different options to clarify. The good news is that after all the clarification, all the options, the Gemara Paskin is like the most kuladik option. So it's always good to know. We learned a couple of days ago that there was a Rav who said, anytime you want to say a kula, say it in my name. So the Gemara is going to say a kula. I'm not sure. What is the shear of 17 2 Amas? 17 2 Amas is the maximum distance between houses if you want to stretch the tchum. So, for instance, let's say you want to say the city doesn't end here. As long as there's little huts along the way, it stretches the city limits, and that's the amount of distance you can stretch, and that works out to it's a half of a certain shear, like a mill or something. It corresponds to a known shear. Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Ein meviin eitzim ela min hamechunas. You can only gather wood if it's mechunas shebekarf. So this is more chomerdik than any one of the two shittas in our Mishnah, because it has to be mechunas and it has to be bekarfet. Rabbi Yehuda said one or the other is enough, right? Even if it's in your sada, as long as it's mechunas. But if it's mekarfet, it could be even minafuzah. So the question is, this halacha from Yehuda Mishmul and Amoira is not consistent with our Mishnah. Zok to Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Mishmul is trying to tell us that our Mishnah is not kalacha, because Masnishin Yechidahi. Our Mishnah is only following the shita of one Tana, but most of the Tanas argue on our Mishnah's understanding of these halachas, and therefore you have to be more machmer, and it's not enough that it should be in an enclosed area like in Karfif, but it also has to be gathered. The Tanya, we're going to illustrate the individual Tana that we're going to disagree with, who would be the source of our Mishnah. The Tana is Amar Shimon ben Elazar. So now we also know some more information, that this whole halacha is also subject to a machlokes b'Shamai and B'Hillel, and we're going to focus on the position of B'Hillel. So l'nechlu b'Shamai B'Hillel ala mifuzarin shebesados. If it's spread out, not gathered, and it's in the field, so you have two dings against you, she'ein meviim, that you're surely not allowed to use as firewood. V'ala mechunosim shebekarpet. If you have two two positives. Number one, it's in your karfif, and number two, it's gathered shemavim. Everybody agrees that that's something you could use wood from for fuel on Yom Tov. Where is there a dispute between the Shammai and Beis Hillel? Ala mefuzarin shebekarfif, yala mechunasim shebesadais. Shebe Shammai oimim lo yavi, Beis Hillel oimim yavi. So according to this shita, Beis Hillel, who says yavi, holds that if it's either mechunis, even though it's in a field, or it's spread out, but it's in a karfif, that would be allowed, which is exactly what our Mishnah says. That is the shita of a yochid. But in fact, the rabbim learn that even Beis Hillel is machmer unless it's both mechunis and it's in a karfif. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel paskin not like our Mishnah, because he's not following Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's version of the machlekes Shammai and Beis Hillel. Rather, he's following the Rabbanon's version, which even in Beis Hillel would say that you need tartila tevusa, both that it should be in the karfif and it should be gathered before you're allowed to use it on Yom. Amar Rava. Rava said, Ale kanim, leaves of kanim trees, I'm not sure what those are, reeds, ale kfanim, and leaves from a vine, afal gav de bechan felahu moisfi, even though they are piled up, it still is not considered gathered, and you won't be able to use them for fuel on Yom Tov. Why is that? Even the madle zeka, mivdelahu, a small wind will just blow it all away, because leaves don't have enough weight to remain in place. Therefore, kimifuzar and dami, we always consider them to be spread out. Vasurin, and therefore they'll be yosy. However, if you put a weight upon them, which will prevent them from blowing away, shaper dami, then it's definitely considered. That you are shaymechan, and you can keep it. So Rashi says, to weigh them down, shaper dami, is samcha daite. If the fact that it's more, you're actually physically mastering them, Rashi says. The fact that you put a weight on them, you're clearly showing you want to hold them. So there you're surely showing that you plan to use it for Yom Tov, so you were mastering it. The question that we need explanation for. I'm sorry?
Even in a karpif, this is only outside. According
to Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel, who paskins that you need both mechunasim, even though it's in a karpif, says so it's not considered mechunas unless it's actually weighed down.
Not weighed that to prevent it from getting scattered, or just so that you do something else?
Also, Victor is asking very good. What if I put a brick on it and weigh it down, and it scatters anyway? Lamaita, I was masmin it, so maybe then I should be able to use it anyway. It's a very good aura. I was masmin it, provided you can identify which leaf was in your pile. But do you have both? Do you have both? Because here it's not just
prevent it from getting scattered and show that you did something about it, or is it enough that you just say you did something?
Because masmin something is even greater. See, we're talking about that wasn't masmin it, but you say it's muzman by default.
No, because he says if it blows around. Oh,
that's the shadow with the eitzim the karfif. It's a muzman by default. Here you had a problem which would make it not muzman by default, and then you were physically masmin it. That might now overrule any problem of blowing it around, right? So I don't know the answer to that. That's a very good aura. So it's interesting. According to Rashi, it's very easy to understand why putting a block on it before Yom Tov will help. But if the problem is ma'amer, like the Ran learns, how does it help if you put a block on it? If it blew around, you're not allowed to gather it. So that's what the Rishonim deal with. We'll stick with Rashi's shot. With Rashi's shot, it's most simple to understand. So now, before we learn the Gemara Vayter, we will look at this next line in Rashi because it articulates what Duvi asked. Rabbi Yosy said that it has to be under lock and key in order for it to be mechunis. Is he being machmer over what Rabbi Yehuda said, or is he being mekel? But Rashi takes it out. The milsa Rabbi Yehuda nami mivoilam heichi. So there'll be a lot that's up in the air in this next shayla. So let's see what the Gemara says. Ezo karfif. The Gemara wants to know what is a karfif. The Mishnah wants to know what's a karfif, and the Mishnah says that according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's called shesamach la'ir, and according to Rabbi Yosy, it's called shenichnasan loy b'paisachas. So let's have a look. Ibaylu. The Gemara wants to know what exactly is happening. Hey chika amar. What is the Rabbi Yehuda saying in there, and by extension Rabbi Yosy? Kol shesamach la'ir. Yehuda is like Pesachas. Does Rabbi Yehuda mean that, of course, it needs a Pesachas, but we're saying you also need to be close to the city? Well, also Rabbi Yosy, Lamemer, and Rabbi Yosy says that given the Islay Pesachas, if you have a lock, afilu b'toich chum Shabbos nami. So Rabbi Yosy is being makel. The Chachamim hold you need a Pesachas by default, but it also has to be close. And Rabbi Yehuda says if you have a Pesachas, it could even be far away. So let's see what Rashi says. Kol shesamach la'ir b'hu de'islay Pesachas mafteach a lock key. Shemishtamer because it's protected. Why didn't the Tana mention the Ferish? The Tana just said, Rabbi Yehuda just said it's closed. If he holds you need to have a lock and key, why didn't he actually articulate that? Zot Rashi mishum de kasavar stomon yesh lem pesachas. Maybe the reason why Rabbi Yehuda didn't speak out that it's under lock and key because all karfifs were under lock and key generally, so he didn't have a need to mention that. Vastam karfifis amar lemilsei. He was the Tanakam Rabbi Yehuda was referring to a typical karfif, which we assume has a key. So all he had to add to it is that it also has to be closed. And Rabbi Yosy said, I don't need that extra. And Rabbi Yosy adds to the Tanakam Rabbi Yehuda, the Rashi, even the Islay Pesachas, in some. Since it's under lock and key, I don't have that additional requirement of Rabbi Yehuda that has to be closed. And therefore we can figure out the less loy Pesachas, if it does not have a key, but in samach, you would need samach, the ishtri b'ach. So maybe Rabbi Yosy agrees to the Chachamim. No, maybe Rabbi Yosy holds that if you have a lock, you also need the less loy Pesachas. So if you don't have a lock, it has to be closed. So at this point, Rashi wants to say that Rabbi Yosy would hold that if it's close is enough, and you don't need a lock. You only need a lock if you're far away. While Rabbi Yehuda holds, you need to have a lock and you need to be close. So Rabbi Yehuda is very machmer, and Rabbi Yosy is not so machmer. He holds one or the other is enough. Since Rabbi Yosy said that the heter of using wood from an area that's far away, it's linked, it requires the lock, Michlal, we can deduce from there, the samach beloy Pesach is nami shari, or make a batart. So we might be able to argue that Rabbi Yosy holds one or the other is enough. Because Rabbi Yosy didn't just say generally if it has a lock. Rabbi Yosy said if it has a lock and it's korov, if it has a lock and it's far, if it has a lock and it's far, then it's good. That would be mashma that if it was close, it didn't need a lock. So Rabbi Yehuda Bar Tavai, Rabbi Yehuda holds you need both a lock and samach. Rabbi Yosy over b'chad asagi be'ezoi shetehei sham. Either if it's close without a lock, or if it's far and it has a lock, it'll be good. That's one option as to how to understand Rabbi Yosy. Rabbi Yosy being very makel, one or the other, a lock or close is independently enough to be matir. Or you might be able to argue that hachi kamar. So let's just see Rashi. Oidilma kol shesamach le'ir the ka'amar Tanakama. When the Tanakama said samach le'ir, well hachi talatayme. That's what it depends on. Even to have a samach, if it's close, bein the islay pesachas bein the lester. So in the first shot, the Rabbi Yehuda was saying not only must it be close, but you also need a lock. In the second shot, we're suggesting that the Tanakama holds close is enough without a lock. So let's see the Gemara inside. If it's close to the city, bein the islay pesachas, bein the less like pesachas, whether it has a lock or not, it doesn't matter. It's only proximity that determines if you could take them as karfif. Also, Rabbi Yosy Lamemer, and Rabbi Yosy came to say that afilu b'toich tchum Shabbos, you're even allowed to take from a karfif that's far away up to the tchum Shabbos. The dafka the islay pesachas. Dafka if it has a lock of a less like pesachas, but if it does not have a lock, afilu samach le'ir nami loy, you wouldn't be able to. So Rabbi Yosy says it's only dependent upon a lock, and the Chachamim say that if it's close, it doesn't need a lock at all. Tashma. So let's see what the real shot is. Midikatani Rabbi Yosy Omer kol shenechnosan loy b'pesachas va'afilu b'toich tchum Shabbos. We're being medayik from the words that Rabbi Yosy added that we alluded to earlier. It says va'afilu b'toich tchum Shabbos. If the only condition is lock, then all it should have said was kol shenechnosan loy b'pesachas is allowed. Why did he stick in va'afilu b'toich tchum Shabbos? That clearly tells us that Rabbi Yosy is saying I only need a lock because it's far away. If it's far away, I need a lock. But if it was close, I wouldn't even need a lock. Shmamina. Rabbi Yosy tati l'kulak amar shmamina. So this is proof positive that Rabbi Yosy holds one or the other is enough in order to be matter to use the wood from this carpet. If it's close, you wouldn't need a lock. And if it's far, If it's far away, but it's within the Tchum Shabbos, if it's locked, it's also considered Muslim. Beautiful. So we passed an halacha. It's always a nice way to end the Gemara that the most politic option that we discussed is the one that's halacha l'maisa.
Yosy. Hello. Yosy?
What's that?
Can you hear me?
Sure.
Okay. What about, like, who cares where it is? Let's say he doesn't use it on a regular basis. And even if it's under lock and key, who says he has das that he set it aside? Let's say he hasn't been there in a month. Who cares if it's under lock and key?
So that's a good argument. So really what the machlokes is about is, what does a person consider part of his pantry, right? If it's in your pantry, you're for sure going to consider it muzman. You're not going to say, well, I was planning to have peanut butter on Yom Tov and not jelly, so I'm not allowed to use jelly. I wasn't masculine. Anything that's in your pantry, everybody will agree is muzman. The machlokes here, because the evasion of Yehuda is, what is considered muzman? You're right. A person definitely thinks about wood that's in his garage or that's in his kitchen near the stove a lot more than he would think about something that's further out. But the fact is, it is in the back of his mind, available to him if he needs it. And is that muzman enough to remove the problem of muksa? But that's exactly what the shaila is about. Since it's more removed, so it's not my first line of defense. It's only something that I think of. If I run out of wood, it's hard to determine exactly how much firewood you'll need. If I run out of wood, you have it as your plan B or your plan C. And that is the shaila. There's a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. Is that also muzman enough to allow you to use it on Yom Tov? Now we learned that you cannot use for firewood something that wasn't prepared for firewood, something that wasn't going to be used. That's why it had to be gathered in the field or in the carpet. So what happens if you're building a house and you have a nice pile that was just delivered to you from the lumberyard, a pile of beams. There you're not allowed to cut firewood out of because that's going to be muksa. What if you had a beam that was in your house and it broke on Yom Tov? So it's not a good beam anymore. It's going to be used for firewood. You're not allowed to use that either because once again, when Yom Tov came in, that was muksa. The ein mevakin. And once you are going to chop wood, you're not allowed to chop wood in the normal fashion. So therefore, you cannot use a standard axe. And the Gemara is going to discuss the design of how an axe is formed. And the Gemara is going to tell us that in different places, axes had different shaped blades and different size blades. Migra is a saw. I envision it as one of those lumber saws that lumberjacks use. So you have one guy on one side, one on the other side with a big blade in the middle. Mago, and you know how to use a sickle, which is something that you cut produce with, I think, like you cut stalks of wheat. Alabakufitz, you're allowed to use a meat hack, because that's something that's really not normally used to cut the wood with. So let's see what Rashi says, what the restrictions are. So the issue here is klei umnus, it's professional. I don't know what these things are. So it's all about the problem is that it creates a professional cut. Again, by migra klei umanu, it's made for professionals. The magal klei umanheim, and therefore v'nira ka'oiseh by malacha. When you're using a professional tool, when you're using a Black & Decker saw, then people are going to think you're professional. If you're using Ryobi, then maybe they won't be worried about you being a professional. So you cannot use tools that are professional. But kuvitz, stam kuvatu sakin shal katzovim, it's made for butchers. Doimel karduma shalonu, it looks like our axes. But einan kliyuman, there are definitely lots of type of tool that are used by professionals, by tradesmen. The yesha oisin by shnei Russian. Some of these axes have a blade on either side. And you'll see one side of this blade looked like a standard axe. Meat hacks are normally not used by professional woodcutters or cutters at all, and therefore it's something that the Chum allowed to use. So once again, even though we're doing these malachas and we're allowed to do them in Torah Chol Nefesh, the Chazal was makpid that it shouldn't be done on the professional fashion.
By taking the women taking the water, right?
Right.
There, the Chum didn't want to make it so much more difficult for them.
That was because there is no option. There was no, we could, that was because of EF. Since there's nothing that we can have them modify that'll help. Because if we tell them to take a big keli, it's heavier. Small keli, it's more work. And cover it, will be schita. So there was no option.
But in every case, their reason it was rejected was because it made it harder for them.
Right.
This will also make it harder for them.
So it sounds from the Gemara that it doesn't make it harder, but it has a less professional result. If you cut with a professional tool, you'll get a nice cut. If you cut with a tool that's not designed for it, it'll cut, but it won't look nice.
Why would a sickle be a problem for cutting wood? Because it's not for that use. It's obvious it's not a professional cut.
I'm not sure. I don't understand how I would cut with a sickle at all. How do you cut wood with a sickle? I don't understand exactly how it works. But Rashi tells us it's more professional. So I'm not sure. I'm not a wood chopper, so I don't understand exactly how that works. Like the famous story with the ragged chopper. The ragged chopper went over that guy.
I mean, if you're using a butcher's tool, which is an uman, right, for cutting.
Well, it seems like
why should that be different than a sickle?
Is something that everybody uses at home. That's what it sounds like from Rashi. Nowadays we don't even use that because we buy nice packaged meats. But in the olden days, people did more work.
Okay, sorry, you're going to say a story about the
ragged chopper. The ragged chopper didn't always have a lot of patience for his balabatim. So he went over to a balabas and he asked him, why is it that when the driver whips the horse, it runs? So the guy looks at him and says, Rebbe, I'm a lawyer. I'm not a wagon driver. How would I know how that works? So Rebbe said, I'm not asking you because you're a wagon driver. I'm asking you because you're a ferret. He called this guy a ferret. You're a horse. I'm not asking you as a wagon driver. I'm asking you as ferret. Zok Gemara, fact Gemara, but how much ratio? Ein mevaken klal. Didn't the ratio of the Mishnah say that you're not allowed to cut wood at all, referring to those types of wood? So the Mishnah says you're not allowed to cut wood, and when you cut, you should use these tools. The Mishnah just finished saying that you're not supposed to cut wood. We need to add a little bit of information into this Mishnah to make it clear. And this is the rule. Ein mevaken, and I'm going to slide into the Bach. Ein mevaken eitzim. You're not allowed to cut wood at all. Not from a freshly delivered pile of lumber that you just ordered from Home Depot to construct your deck or your addition. And you cannot use a beam that was part of your house on Yom Tov and it broke, so now you're going to replace it, so you're going to just use it for firewood. Avo, and the reason why you can't naturally is because by Ben Shmoshes, it was part of your house. Avo mavakin min akoira shenishba me'erev Yom Tov. You are allowed to use a beam, you're allowed to chop up a beam that was already broken from Erev Yom Tov, because that would no longer be muksa. Because even before Yom Tov, it was already destined to be used for your firewood. Now, even this type of wood that's not muksa, that you're allowed to chop up on Yom Tov, there's restrictions as to how you're allowed to chop it up. Ein mevaken like the kardum, like the magol, like the migra, Tanya nami hachi. We learned a brayso which in fact supports this halacha, and Rashi specifically says the time of the muksa. The reason why in the first half of the Mishnah you can't use those types of wood, the pile of wood, or the broken beam, is because of muksa. Because it says ein mevaken eitzim loy min asoyach shel kairos v'loy min akar shenishbar b'yom tov l'vishe'enim min hamuchim. So it's quite clear in this brayso that the reasoning for the first half of our Mishnah is because it's muksa. Both of these woods, when Yom Tov arrived during the Beitzah Shmoshes of Yom Tov, they were not destined to be used for firewood, and therefore they're muksa. Firewood, you're allowed to chop up further, but with restrictions. So what does the Gemara say? Restriction A is you cannot use a proper axe. So first of all, in Reb Chinina's place where he lived, the way kardumas were built was the blade on top, it sticks out in front and it sticks out in back. And there were different size blades. So if we look at Rashi, the one side of this metal blade had a very wide blade. That was the blade that you would normally use to cut. When you use that side, that creates a very nice professional cut. But on the other half of the blade, even our axe blades also usually sticks out in the front and in the back. In the front, it's got a wider blade. In the back, it's a thinner blade. It's more like a point. So if you chop up the wood with that point, the Rosh Cutter That would be mutter. Why? Because that does not give you such a professional cut. In fact, the more pshita, it's pashit. It's pashit. You're not allowed to. It's pashit that you're allowed to use the zachar shaloi. It's not a professional cut. So the Gemara, the kufitz. The chiddush is that it's a kufitz, and by a kufitz, Rashi tells us is that both sides are narrow. Both sides are narrow. Now, what we're saying is that to Reb Chanina is not speaking about an axe which has one side that's professional and one side that does not give you a professional cut. That's not allowed to be used at all. What Reb Chanina is saying is that you're allowed to use a kufitz. What's the chiddush that you're allowed to use a kufitz? A kufitz does not have a wide blade on either side, so no matter which side you use, it won't be a professional cut. But ma'u detema hanamili kufitz l'chudei. That's dafka if you have on both sides a small blade. Aval kaidim b'kufitz. If you happen to have had a keli that on one side was wide and on one side was thin, ema, maybe you should say migu the high gisa aser, high gisa nami aser. Since if you use the wide side, it would not be allowed. So therefore, we're also going to disallow you from using the thin side. Kamash malam, that you're still allowed to use the thin side. So on the kufitz, you're allowed to use the thin side, and if you have a wide side and a thin side, you're allowed to use the thin side. Okay. There are those who quoted Reb Chanina's words on the sefer, where the Mishnah says all you're allowed to use is a kufitz. So the way Reb Chanina is learning is that the kufitz is the one that had a wide side and a narrow side. In the first nusach, we were saying that the kufitz had a thin side on both sides of the blade. Now we're saying that where in his area, the way they built kufitz is with a small blade and a wide blade. And on the kufitz, he said, that the Mishnah allows you to use the kufitz is only on the thin side. Shita. Dr. Gemara, Shita v'loy b'kardim tan. I want to go back a little bit because I don't think I said the right shot earlier. So let's go back again. Talking about the kardim itself, we're only disallowing the wider blade. The thinner blade, mutter would be mutter. We obviously know that you're allowed to use a thin blade because that's exactly the reason why the Mishnah said that you're allowed to use the kufitz because you're allowed to use the thin blade. So maybe you're only allowed to use a kufitz because it's thin on both ends and there's no way you can use it at all the wrong way. But the axe, which has on one side a thick blade and on the other side a thin blade, maybe they'll both be usher. Kamash malon. So Reb Chanina is saying a chiddush that even the kardim that the Mishnah disallowed, the Mishnah is only disallowing its use on the wide side, but the kardim you're also allowed to chop wood with it on the narrow side. Then there are those who explain the halacha of Reb Chanina referring to the sefer. It says elba kufitz. You only allowed to use a kufitz. In this nusach, it's the kufitz that had a wide side and a narrow side. Of course, the zachar side is mutter and the nakba side is usher, because the wider side gives a better cut. It tells us that you can't use a kardim. And in this nusach, a kardim has a wide blade on both sides. So clearly you're not allowed to use a wide blade, you're only allowed to use a narrow blade. Maybe only a kardim the Mishnah is outlying. Why? Because both blades are wide. But if you have a keli that has one wide blade and one small blade, maybe you'd even be allowed to use the wide blade, which gives you a good cut, because the keli is not a typical keli that you use on Yom Tov. And maybe that would be enough to allow you to use it. So based on these two nuschos, according to the second nusach, if you have a kupitz, you're restricted even in the use of the kupitz only to use a pointed blade that it has. If the kupitz also has a wide blade that would give you a professional cut, you would not be able to use it. While in the first nusach, we're even allowing you to use a kardim. If it has a wide blade and a thin blade, you'd be able to use the thin blade on the kardim. So I don't know if it makes halacha l'maisa difference. I think the two nuschos are just based on how they design the tools. In the first nusach, they're assuming that the kardim has one wide blade and one skinny blade, and the kufitz has two small blades. And in the second nusach, we're assuming that the kardim had a wide professional blade on both sides, and it's the kufitz that had one on one. But whatever the case is, where there's one-on-one, it seems to be that you're allowed to use the narrow blade and not the wide blade. What happens if you had a storehouse that was full of pears, but it was sealed? Which means it would be muksa because you weren't planning to use it on Yom Tov because it was a completely sealed house. V'nivchas, and the wall broke open. The house broke open, so now you have access to take pears out if you want. So the halach is noitel mimokem hapchas. You're actually allowed to stick your hand in, and you're allowed to take the pears out. And Rashi tells us the chiddush is muksin machmas isser. You don't say that muksin machmas isser. Why is it an isser? Then yochal lefascha b'yom tov. You wouldn't have been allowed to open this warehouse on Yom Tov, and because you wouldn't be able to open on Yom Tov, you wouldn't be thinking of using it. So these pears should be muksa. Zokt Rashi, you don't say that. Why don't you say it? Even though have a psichasa isur daraisa, we're going to show you that you can get into this warehouse without being over an isur daraisa, to the mekminal abavir delivnei, and we'll get into that soon. So since it's only an isur darabanan that prevents you from getting those pears, it's considered. Then the Rashi show muchen etzel shabbos from other particular sukkah. The halach is that's considered muchen. If there's only an isur darabanan preventing you from getting it, that's considered muchen. Okay. So again, the wall opened up. You didn't do any aver. You're allowed to take those pears. Reb Meir says, "Af poiches lechatchila v'noitel." You're actually allowed to break open the wall lechatchila and take pears from inside. And the Gemara is going to explain why that would be allowed. Am I afraid Gemara? How are you allowed to break open a building? It's breaking an oil. There is binyan in theory in oil. You're not allowed to do any action that even slightly dismantles an oil. And here you're taking bricks away. Here you're opening it up. We don't know yet that it's bricks. We're speaking about a building that was built by piling bricks up on one another without cementing them. So you're not really busting it up. You're just unpiling the blocks. And that is not considered an isser daraisa, because you're not breaking it. It was never cemented together. It was just bricks piled up on one another. Any fekmer, is that so? Rav Nachman said, Hani livni, da yaiser mibinana. What if you built your house? Normally building materials are muksa. They're muksa machmas chasar kis. You want to save them to build with. But you have leftover blocks. Usually at the end of construction, you have some leftover cinder block, some leftover bricks. So the extra things that you have left over are not muksa. Shari little telinu b'shabbat. You know why? Because you're no longer saving them for construction. You're going to use them. Hoyel v'chazi lemizga alayu. Since you could sit on it, you could lean on it. It's something that you can use. Therefore, it will not be muksa. What about sharginu? Which Rashi tells us as he piled them up one on top of the other. He sort of built a wall with it. Rashi sharginu sarjan zu al zu. So that's goli daitoi shemekatza mabinyan. Once you pile it up into a neat pile, now you're clearly showing that you're not just letting it hang around your lawn to use casually. Rather, you want to save them in a nice pile to build with in the future. So once again, so if the Gemara is asking, how could you allow you to take those blocks off to open up the wall? It's piled up nicely, so it should be muksa. So once again, sharginu, if you do put it in a pile, clearly you're saving it as a building material, and now those blocks are muksa. So how could you open up this? How can you move the blocks if the blocks are muksa? The Yom Tov Amru, it's only a Yom Tov of Aloy b'Shabbos. And once again, Tosfos speaks out. This is another place where you quite clearly see that we waive the halachas of muksa when it comes to Eichel Nefesh. These blocks are between you and the Paris. These blocks are normally muksa, but you're allowed to move those blocks in order to unseal the food that you're looking for. Tanya Amihachi, we learned similarly in a Beitzah, you're allowed to open up the wall to get the pears inside. The Yom Tov Amru of Aloy b'Shabbos. This only applies to Yom Tov, but it does not apply on Shabbos, because on Shabbos there is no heter of violating muksa or taking things apart, which is an issue rabbanon for a source for the purpose of getting food.
Yeah, why are we not worried about a rabbana when it comes to demolition, but we are worried about rabbana and muksa? They're both rabbana, so why?
I think I couldn't hear you. Why are we not worried about a rabbana for what?
For tearing down the bricks, but we're worried about the Rabbanan Muksa. They're both Rabbanan, so why aren't we worried?
We're not worried about either one. It's allowed.
No, we said by Muksa, you're not allowed to only on Yom Tov. Or just
Well, the
for both
Gemara's
or only
question
Yom Tov?
was, what about the problem of Muksa? And the Gemara answered, on Yom Tov, because it's Yom Tov, will allow you to violate Muksa for the purposes of Eichel Nefesh.
Okay, and so the other
The
one
Gemara,
is
he's
also
asking why the
only,
Gemara mentioned. The Gemara already said the other
right.
Rabban of opening it up is not a problem. I guess the
Right.
Gemara wants to make sure that all of the boxes are checked.
Case of the bricks is only for Yom Tov too?
That you're allowed to open up yes, it's only on Yom Tov.
Okay.
You would not be able to do that on Shabbos. So Meisei Frek Gemara, Chaysamay Shabakarka. If you have Chaysamay Shabakarka, what are Chaysamay Shabakarka? So Rashi says Paramudurish, which doesn't help me much, but the next Rashi is Chaysamay Shabakarka, Kegoyin Dalsois, Pischei Boyrois, Uma'ira Hasagurin, Bekishri Chabot. So they would have little cisterns with water, and they would be covered with a wooden cover, and it would be tied down to keep it covered. So Chaysamay Shabakarka, the Shabbos, if you wanted to get a drink from the well, Matir, you could untie the knot. How are you allowed to untie a knot? Rashi says, the lav kesher shel kayamahu. This is not a knot that's going to remain in place. You're always opening it and closing it to open the door to get a drink. So matir, you're allowed to open it. Umafkia. I'm sorry. Matir avaloy mafkia. You're not allowed to Rashi to take out hachevel lister avoisav yilos to totally there was a final tie to keep it closed, but I guess the rope was braided to create the latch or the lock that it's going to form. You're not allowed to totally disconnect these ropes, and you're not allowed to cut. You're not allowed to cut. And Rashi, the reason why you can't cut is v'yesh stira b'vinyan shel karka. This is built in. It's built into the ground. So you can't undo the ropes because you're taking out a kesher shel kiyama. You can't cut the ropes because that's stira. But Shebekalim, what if you have a mobile box? It's not something that's built in. So there's, according to Beitzah, there's no problem of binyan and stira and kalim. So Shebekalim matir umafkia v'chaytach. If you have a box that you want to open, you have a package, you're allowed to cut the string, you're allowed to untie everything. That you're allowed to do because it's not a problem of binyan. Echad Shabbos v'echad Yom. And this applies both to Shabbos and to Yom. That's what Shmuel said. Meisei Frek the Gemara. We're going to show you, in fact, that there's a difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. Chayshamish bekarka, b'Shabbos matir avoloy mafkia v'loy but the Yom Tov matir umafkia v'chaytach. So the problem is, Shmuel said that even on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to be mafkia and you're not allowed to be chaytach. Yet the Beitzah says on Yom Tov you're allowed to do anything. So how do you explain that? So after Gemara, Hamani Reb Meir he. This Beitzah is going with Reb Meir. The Amar Af Poiseich Lechatchila V'Noitel. This Beitzah allows you to open up the bar completely and undo the knots and cut it open, which is also and it's built in. He allows you to do it. Where do you see such a Reb Meir? In our Mishnah, Reb Meir said you could even take the bricks open up the bricks to get the pairs. But the Rabbanan of our Mishnah argues and says if the bricks were open, you're allowed to take fruit out, but you're not allowed to dismantle the bricks to get in there. I'm saying like the Rabbanan, and that's why even on Yom Tov, I only allow you to open up the last knot, which will allow you to get the water out, but I don't allow you to dismantle the entire assembly. Talk more about it. The place where you illustrated the machlokes was if you're allowed to open up these bricks. You want to stretch it and say that the Rabbanan are arguing in this case as well. Vatanya moedim chachamim Reb Meir b'chayshamish shebekarka shebeshabbos mater avoloy mafkia v'loy chaytech, but b'yom tov mater umafkia v'chaytech. So you can't say that from our Mishnah you have a raya that they be the same machlokes and the same chumrah by chayshamish because we have a Beitzah that clearly says that you don't have that chumrah. Zok Gemara, you're right. The Beitzah that you quoted shows that the Chachamim in our Mishnah would be matir. But there's another Tana that argues on you. Who darmaki hai Tana? The Tanya Chashamish Bekarka matir avoloy mafkia v'loy chaytech echad Shabbos ve'echad Yom Tov. So you have a Tana that supports what Shmuel said in the name of the Rabbanan that on Yom Tov, even on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to do this. B'sheb Kalim, if it's on a keli, so it's not built into the ground, so there's no problem of binyan and stira. Matir, you're allowed to open it up. The Shabbos matir avoloy mafkia. For the Chaytech and Shabbos, you're only allowed to open up a box, but I'm talking the last opening, but the rest of you're not allowed to cut it open and take it all off. Yomdiv matir umafkia b'chayta. Okay, let's stop here because it's getting a little bit late, so we will stop here. Have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. I should have pushed the Mishnah though. Shabbos. Have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. Shabbos gracious. It's a big job to be Mavish Hedger this week.